Hello friends! I'm excited to celebrate this month of Macintosh by showing you a totally unique PDS card that puts a whopping 256 megabytes of RAM into your Macintosh SE30. That's more than double what you can install using regular RAM SIMs. The card is called Synchr030 and it's from YMK Devices, maker of the fabulous Mac SD that I reviewed a few years ago. I started beta testing an engineering sample of the Synchr030 in April 2024, and it really blew my mind. It's a beautiful 8-layer circuit board in a matte black finish with golden egg pads, and that's impressive when you consider that the SE30 motherboard is only 6-layer. Capacitors are solid polymer and won't ever leak. The 3 LEDs are positioned to be visible from the side, even with the case on if you happen to have a MacEffects clear case. And the good news is, MacEffects started a new Kickstarter this year to generate funds for another manufacturing run. So if you've been wanting a clear case for your SE30, now's your chance. Now I know what some of you are thinking, even 128 megabytes is more than I need, why would I need this card? And that's a good question. And it could be that after watching this video, some of you ultimately will decide not to buy it. But what I can say about Synchr030 is that it's a complete rethink of how to add RAM to your SE30 motherboard. First off, it's low power. It doesn't draw any more power than 8 sticks of traditional SIM memory would installed into your SIM sockets here, only drawing about 2.2 watts, which is fairly low power. But the main appeal of Synchr030 is that it solves the all too common problem of broken or malfunctioning SIM sockets. In the past, one of my SE30 motherboards had broken RAM sockets, and as you can see, some of the tabs are missing. The plastic tabs lock the RAM SIMs into the upright position, and the SIMs won't make good electrical contact in the socket without the tabs. Even if you don't have broken tabs on your SIM sockets, it could be that you have a trace that's broken underneath, because I had a board like that in the past due to a leaky electrolytic capacitor, and it chewed right through the trace. The Synchr030 solves all those kind of problems because it doesn't use the SIM sockets at all. The traces that lead to the SIM sockets, it doesn't use those at all. You have to remove all of your RAM SIMs before you can even begin to use Synchr030. And it doesn't even use the motherboard's DRAM controller chip either. That's because Synchr030 has 256 megabytes of RAM on board, plus its own DRAM controller, which is great because the SE30 motherboard's DRAM controller stalls for memory refreshes, which is basically a slowdown, whereas the Synchr030 keeps on trucking at full speed. Now, how fast is that, you ask? Well, if you keep your machine in mostly stock condition and basically only add this card, which means you don't have any other accelerators added to the PDS slot, then this RAM is 2 times the performance compared to your traditional SIM memory. Now that doesn't make your machine into the equivalent of a 50 megahertz accelerated machine, of course, but it is much faster RAM and it's a noticeable benefit. I would feel basically in my own use of the machine that everything is a bit snappier overall. And Macbench 3 shows us why it's snappier. You can see that I did the all tests, which take a few hours to run. My stock 16 megahertz SE30 with 128 megabytes of RAM. These are DRAM SIMs and not Synchr030. Also having a relatively slow Blue SCSI version 1 installed is our baseline configuration, and you can see that's pegged here at 100%. And immediately below that, we have the same machine, but with Synchr030 and its companion ECS daughter card installed. And I will explain what ECS is a little bit later. But as you can see, the processor score with Synchr030 is 25% faster than when compared to using just normal DRAM SIMs. And even the FPU performance floating point here is a modest 7% faster. Now I've run these tests multiple times and can confirm that these numbers come out the same every time, so these are not just a one-off fluke set of benchmarks here. And below that, at the very bottom, we see there are 2 sets of graphics tests that were run, and we've got a 15% and 16% respective increase over DRAM SIMs. And then above that, we have our disk mix and publishing disk mix, and we see very noticeable speed differences here too, although that really depends on your drive, and I'll be showing you more benchmark results about that later with the Blue SCSI version 2 and also a Mac SD. Synchr030S has another feature called ROM shadowing, which copies the contents of ROM into high-speed RAM, doubling the performance of the Macintosh toolbox routines, which makes your computer feel just very slightly faster overall. Also, the card allocates an additional 256 kilobytes of RAM to the system heap, and that better ensures that you're not going to have out-of-memory errors. Before beginning the installation, I strongly suggest that you make sure your motherboard and your analog board and your power supply, the PSU back here, this metal box, are all recapped. Otherwise, you may have unexpected problems. This is true for any SE30 upgrade and is not specific to this particular card. I also recommend that you upgrade the wires that are in your main wire harness to thicker wires. And it's very easy to do that now. You can buy wires online that are just the right length, and they're pre-crimped with exactly what you need. And I put links in the video description so you can more easily do that. Next, you want to make absolutely sure that you have a non-stock ROM, such as a Rominator 2. In this case, this is a Garrett's Workshop ROM with 16 megabytes of memory on it. There are a variety of ROM SIM vendors out there. Do not use your stock SE30 ROM. So if you don't have a ROM SIM, then you should hold off on getting Synchr030 until you get one, because these are extremely important. They prevent the RAM checks from happening at cold boot. And when you have 256 megabytes of RAM, that's going to take a very long time to check the RAM. And that's really the primary reason to have this. I put links to all of the ROM SIM vendors in the video description. Now, I should also say that if you have a ROM SIM socket with plastic tabs, which is the socket you're seeing here on this particular board, some of them, the ROM SIMs will not make good contact until you add ROM clips. If you buy the GW series one from Zane's Workshop, Garrett's Workshop, excuse me, they come with ROM clips. Some of the other ROM SIM vendors do not include them, so you'd have to buy them separately. But basically, these ROM clips help the ROM SIM to make good contact. But the problem is that if you install the card into the PDS slot, it touches this side because ROM clips are quite big. So you're going to have to remove the one on the right side in order to make the PDS card fit. Now in my case, I've tested this, and even with only the leftmost clip in there, it makes good enough contact to where I can put in the PDS card in this particular motherboard, and it does work. But in your case, if you find that it doesn't, then I don't know that anybody makes a thinner ROM clip, so swapping out, getting the ROM SIM socket swapped out with one that has metal clips is a potential solution, but that's more costly if you pay somebody to do it. So typically ROM clips are best if you have one to where it's not making good contact. If your ROM SIM fits in there and has a good contact even with plastic clips such that you don't need ROM clips, then there's nothing to worry about. Next, you want to make sure that all RAM SIMs are removed from your sockets. It won't harm your computer if you forget and leave them in, and I know that because I accidentally did it once, but the manual says that you should definitely remove them before you power on with Synchr030 installed. This is the ECS daughter card that I told you about before, and if you have no plans to use an accelerator, then you'll need to solder this onto the bottom of your SE30 motherboard to get maximum speed from your Synchr030. Now here is the bottom side of one of my SE30 motherboards, and unfortunately I can't install it on this board because the person who installed the socket in my board put a lot of heat on it, and it caused this to bubble, and it caused this area to bubble, and it broke a trace, and I had to fix it. And unfortunately this wire goes directly under the Synchr030S. So I'm going to show you another board later, but basically I'm going to show you this board first just to say that you're going to have to put on the Synchr030 board on the underside of your SE30 motherboard where the CPU socket is, but there's a little hole here in the bottom right corner, which you can see here, and the wire for Synchr030 needs to go into that hole, right? You'll need to put the wire into that hole first before you solder it down. And here's my other SE30 motherboard where I was able to do the installation. I did the installation back in April of 2024, and so that's why I'm not going to show you the actual soldering. But basically, on this side of the 6830 CPU, there are, going vertically, 4 rows of pins, and you need to mount it on the bottom 3 rows. So you can barely see the 4th row of pins exposed directly above the Synchr030 board. And what you're going to do is just solder in the circled areas, just those 2 points, and that's all. And nothing else needs to be soldered. So it's very easily. You just have to make sure that you put the wire through, and you can see that the wire is coming out the other side of the board. And also, if you ever want to remove this board, do not use hot air, because if you do, all of these other holes, sadly, when this board is made, all of the through holes have to be tinned. And that means if you use hot air, these are going to get soldered down to all of these pins, and you probably won't be able to get it off. So what you're going to have to do is alternate between these two and with a really hot soldering iron in order to take it off. So it's only, in other words, it's only tacked down with this and this with just a very tiny amount of solder. So again, it's not a very difficult installation at all, but I just need to emphasize, repeating it over and over again, absolutely you need to make sure that your wire goes in this hole first. And it's going to go through to the other side. And then after that, you can plunk it down on the bottom 3 rows of pins and then put your solder in the very middle of where it's circled here and here. Now before we connect Synchr030, you want to make sure that your blue jumper is set on /SDRAM STRAM, and that is the leftmost side. There's 3 pins here, and it's on the left 2. And it's only when you have certain accelerators that you would need to take off the jumper and move it to the rightmost 2 pins in the upper row, not the lower row, and change it to DSAC. But because I don't have an accelerator, at least right now, we're going to leave it on STRM, and then I'll come back to this later when I talk about accelerator cards. Now when doing the installation, you want to make sure that your little ECS wire sticks out like this. Also, if you're wondering what this yellow tape is, this is Kapton thermal tape, and also on the card itself, I put some Kapton here, and the reason why is because when I installed it, I found that this rightmost edge of the card was making very slight contact with the metal chassis, and my concern was that if any of the inner layers was protruding out a little bit, it might short out. I put it in before I even put the tape on and tested it, and nothing shorted out, but the tape just gives me more peace of mind. And I was told that YMK is going to at some point shorten this right side. I don't know if it's been implemented or not, but once that's shortened, then there's obviously going to be no need for tape. But also, if you look on your card itself, there's a little solder blob here just above this chip, and that is there to prevent this chip from being torn off when you remove the card. And that's because if you'll look here, there are 2 tabs, that one metal tab here, one metal tab here, that are part of the chassis of the SE30. And when you mount the card, the solder blob is going to be, right under that metal tab, and so it's just protecting it. But the solder blob is ground, and so is the metal chassis. So it doesn't matter if the chassis touches that metal blob or not. And then what you want to do is, before you fully seat the card, you want to connect your ECS wire to that little hook jumper there. It's marked ECS here. And you'll put it in just like so. And then make sure that the wire doesn't come underneath. It's a little bit precarious here, but you don't want to smash it into the PDS slot. So just move it out of the way there. Okay. And then you just apply pressure carefully. Now, when the card goes in, this side, left side of the card is going to go on the inner side of this hook, But as you can see here, the card on the right side is going to go on the back of this tab. So again, this side goes on the inner side of the protruding tab, and this side of the card goes on the outside. Now I put a black electrical tape here only because I put in cards and take out cards a lot, and I don't want anything to scratch. So I put a little tape on it there. It has nothing to do with anything shorting or anything like that, just to prevent scratches. And then just carefully make it go down until it won't go down anymore. And there we go. I'm now zoomed in on the 3 LEDs because I'm going to power on in a few seconds here, and I want you to see the order of the LEDs turning on, that sequence. So here we go. All right, you see the ECS LED is the one to come on and stay on. That's white, and that's good because we've connected our ECS wire here, right? If you don't see the white LED, it means that the ECS wire is either disconnected, not making good contact, or your soldering job was bad, or maybe you just forgot to solder that little daughter card completely. And then what's going to happen is, because I'm booting System 7 right now, you see the accelerator, Excel, green LED comes on. And this is telling you that high-speed memory operation is now in effect. And there are times when this will not light, but in this case we've got just a very basic SE30 machine here, so there's not a problem. And whenever you're booting System 6, then this computer will not restart, but when you're booting System 7, it's going to restart. And that restart in System 7 enables 256 megabytes of RAM. System 6 can only handle 128 megabytes max, so there's no restart in that particular case. And in terms of the LED down at the bottom, the FPU, I'm going to be showing you some software that anybody can use to very easily test the FPU and get this one to light. So here we are where the machine is booted, and I'm going to get the FPU to light. You can use MacBench or some other software, but one fast and easy way to test it is the Daystar Power Demo, link in the text description below. I'm going to set this to fractals, and then I'm going to click go. And now we can see the FPU LED coming on. Yours will be yellow. My card is special, and I have red. But basically now we have green, white, and the FPU LED all lit up there. And there we go. We've confirmed the operation of all of the LEDs. And just to let you know, the green and white LEDs are very important because they show you precisely how fast your Synchr030 card is running in accordance with this chart. If you have the green acceleration LED on and ECS white LED on, then you're getting the fastest possible 2-cycle reads and 2-cycle writes. But if you forget to connect ECS or don't connect it for some reason, or if you have an accelerator card, which means ECS cannot be connected, but you have the green LED on, then you will only take a slight speed hit on the reads. It'll drop from 2-cycle to 3-cycle. So just ever so slightly slower, but your write speeds will stay fast 2-cycle. But if you don't have the extension loaded, and for example, compatibility with some accelerators, in that case it wouldn't matter if your ECS is connected or not, then your read and write speeds are going to be just as slow as DRAM SIMs, which is 4-cycle each. Now another big reason to have Synchr030S is because you can put most of that RAM to good use as a super fast RAM disk. And one of the better RAM disk software programs out there was by the famous company Connectix back in the day, and it's called Maxima. And it's really neat software that works in both System 6 and System 7. If you're in System 6, this will let you use 14 megabytes of RAM instead of the normal 8 megabytes max, which is neat. And if you're in System 7, then you can take advantage with 32-bit addressing of the full 256 megabytes of your Synchr030 system, and you can put, a very, very large RAM disk on your system. And I would suggest that you go to Macintosh Garden and download number 3. That's version 3, and it will be easily installable. I use the Basilisk emulator to add that to one of my volumes. And of course, this will be the installer that will let you install the software. And I'm now booted into System 7.1. We can see the installer here. Go ahead and double click this. And what we want to do is I suggest you read the manual first. I'm not going to teach you everything you need to know. This video is not about Maxima. That could be a complete video in and of itself. Please read the manual, download that PDF from Macintosh Garden. And you have the choice of easy setup or install. I recommend install. So that's what I'm going to do. Now obviously you want to choose to install onto a disk that you have enough space on to accept the installation. And there we go. We'll go ahead and finish there. It's a pretty fast installation, not a lot of files. It says restart to use the RAM disk. So go ahead and quit out of here. And we'll just go ahead for good measure and open the Maxima control panel. And it's showing here, I had previously set it up to be 222 megabytes in size, because if you set it to be that big, it'll still give you 32 megabytes of memory. And it's not set up yet, so I haven't restarted yet, but you've got 262 megs up there to play around with, and that's why 222 is about the max. If you want 32 megabytes of RAM, 222 megabytes for your RAM disk is the biggest it can be. It doesn't have to be that big. You can allocate more RAM to the system and less to the RAM disk. It's up to you. And then you've got expert settings, and I recommend the settings that you see here. If you want to have your contents of your RAM disk backed up to your hard drive, you need to have preserve RAM disk settings turned on. I had issues with the image file backup. That's the default setting, but I set mine on file by file, and that seems to work better. And also the double RAM disk size is a default setting, and I unticked that because that uses compression to make your RAM disk even bigger. We don't need bigger than 222 megabytes, really. I mean, if you do, you can check mark that. It just uses compression. And remember, the SC30 is fairly slow, so it's not slow compression. It's just not as fast as it possibly could be. Safeguard RAM disk memory, I want that on. And then load aliased inits and fonts. That means it's going to load the fonts and certain inits off of your hard disk rather than off of the RAM disk. And since we've got plenty of space, I'm not going to worry about it. So those are all the settings, and we'll go ahead and just restart. Now, this is important. You can't see it right now, but I'm holding down the tab, T-A-B, tab key on the keyboard to prevent Maxima from loading, because when Synchr030, right, loads under System 7, it restarts. Now, if you don't push the tab key, then Maxima is going to start loading stuff into RAM, and that's a problem. Because then once it restarts, it'll do it again. And that's going to slow everything down. So unfortunately, if you use Maxima every single time you turn on the computer, you're going to have to push the tab key to make sure that it doesn't load. And then when the computer loads the Synchr030 extension and restarts, then you can release the tab key, which is what you're seeing right now. And this will allow Maxima to load, as you're about to see here in a couple seconds. But it's taking a little bit of extra time here because it's building the RAM disk. And that's why it's a little bit slower. See, Maxima RAM disk created. All right, we got our Synchr030 extension, and there it is, Maxima, the icon, showing that it's okay. So what we should be able to see is, there it is, the Maxima disk. Great. 218 megabytes available, 84K in disk. So you don't get quite 222. You've got some overhead, and it's a little bit less than that. But hey, that's a pretty massive RAM disk, right? And then you just basically choose what files that you want to have on your RAM disk. Now, what I did is I created a folder filled with files. I've got a system folder, full install System 7. I was, a little bit cautious about it, and I didn't put everything under the sun into it. But it's not a minimal system by any means. It's got all the fonts I really need, and it's about 10 megs in size. And then I have HyperCard, Snooper, Microsoft Word 5.1a, which is the best version of Microsoft Word. Various games, Lode Runner, Prince of Persia, SimCity. Canvas 3.5.6, one of the best versions of Canvas for a black and white Mac. Photoshop 4.01, and yes, it does run on an SE30. And you can use other versions if you want. I just want to show you what I'm going to put on it on this. And then benchmarks, speedometer, 2 versions of that, system info from Norton 3.5.3, and MacBench 3.0. And so all of these files together, if I choose Get Info under here, it says 84 megs or 62 megs. You know, this number varies based on the total size of your hard drive, but suffice it to say, it's less than half the size of our Maxima disk. And rather than TTT, it's probably a good idea if I name it something Maxima RAM disk back. That's probably the right thing to call it, don't you think? And then what we can do is, because I've got this all set up, I need to go to Maxima and tell it in expert settings to use the folder. Click once on it and then click folder, right? And then when I go back in and check, yeah, it seems to be set up right. Okay. Okay, and then click OK. OK. All right. And then I'm going to restart. And I'm holding down Tab. So every time, even if you restart, you want to make sure that Tab is held down, because once Synchr030 loads, right, it restarts. You don't hear another bong, but basically it restarted. And by holding down Tab, I'm releasing it now, obviously, but by holding down Tab, you prevented Maxima from loading for 1 session. And now it's slow because it's, again, like it did before, setting up that RAM disk. And it's going to load the extensions, and then it will start loading stuff into the RAM disk, copying from your hard disk into your Maxima RAM disk. And there it is, see, right? It says 875 files. And I'm going to have to speed this up because it's going to take a while. Probably about the last time I clocked it, it was 2 minutes and 12 seconds. And that is yet another disadvantage of Maxima, if you're impatient, is the loading time. And remember, I don't even have half of the Maxima RAM disk filled, right? It's like 60, 70, 80 megabytes in size, and it's not even half filled, but you can see that the stock SE30 with its 16 megahertz 68030 CPU, even with accelerated memory, can only copy so fast. And so every time it's going to set up your RAM disk to load the data for the very first time, it's going to take at least a couple minutes, maybe more if you've got more than 100 megabytes in it. So I'll go ahead and speed this up for you so you don't have to wait. And as we can see here, it's booting from the RAM disk. Pretty awesome, right? And then we should see Maxima as the topmost drive of the 3. Go ahead and click it here, and there's all my files, right? All the files that it copied off of the hard disk, which I had them set up, you know, in advance, and then I just pointed it to my folder, and so it copied them into RAM. So this is completely RAM. It's not pulling this off of the hard drive at all. It's all in RAM. And so if we go up to the Apple menu about this Macintosh, we can see that we've got 32 megabytes available, just as I told you. So you can have a 222 megabyte Maxima RAM disk and still have 32 megs for your software, which is really neat. Really, really neat. And then, of course, everything that is run off of your Maxima drive is going to be accelerated. So for example, I will open up Canvas, and there's that sample file, Denebas F40. And if I double click this file, it's going to launch Canvas. And again, both Canvas and the file are sitting in RAM. And this RAM is Synchr030, and it's accelerated. So 2 cycle reads, 2 cycle writes. And compared to a hard disk, it's quite a bit faster. Compared to some of your SCSI to SD solutions, it's not substantially faster, but still it is pretty fast. Now, a lot of this right now is drawing off of the CPU, but it's still accessing memory, and there it is. So normally this takes a while. If you've ever done it from a spinning platter hard drive before, then you probably know. And just because it's doing it from the RAM doesn't mean everything is instantaneous. For example, one of the slowest loading apps is this, Adobe Photoshop 4.0.1, and I'll show that to you now. It is painfully slow. It's really made for a much newer Mac, not an SE30. But when you put it in RAM, what you're about to see right now, or what you are seeing right now, is as fast as it's ever going to load on a stock machine with no accelerator. Just the stock 16 megahertz 68030 CPU. And you're not able to see it right now, but it actually accesses the FPU a little bit during the loading process, because I'm looking off camera and I can see the LED is lit for the FPU. Not the whole time, but a bit. And there we go. So yeah, it seemed to have taken time and is a little bit slow, but that's actually pretty snappy for Photoshop. And even when you're loading a file, it is using the FPU a little bit. So you're not able to see color. I created this when I was doing K-Cobas, talking about Spicy O'Clock. And OSCON capacitors are the secret sauce to high overclocks. Yeah. So this is a pretty heavy file, but everything is really a lot snappier. When you move things around in Photoshop, it's snappier than it would be on a SCSI drive. And that's because you're getting the maximum throughput. I'll do Microsoft Word right now. You're getting a faster speed from memory than you ever would through the SCSI bus. And there it is, loaded right up. So if you want maximum speed, again, this is the secondary benefit of having Synchr030, is to be able to run software like this from a RAM disk. And you've got Prince Persia. I mean, you can put whatever you want on it, obviously. But SimCity, and you can do that. Anything that normally pounds on RAM, you know, scrolling, moving around, you've got a lot of things going on. It can benefit from having faster memory. Beep, beep. And there we are, SimCity. So, you know, there's a lot that I could go into, but it's probably best that I just show you the benchmarks. By what I mean, how it's much faster than any SCSI drive. And here we are in MacBench 3 again. All of these were done with all tests. It takes a long time, so no less than 2 hours each, because this is a stock machine. But basically what we saw before, stock SE30 with the Blue SCSI version 1. So 3 of them with Blue SCSI version 1, although no ECS means LED is turned off, the ECS board is disconnected. And you can see there's a slight speed hit there. Instead of 125%, you only get 115. And then we have Blue SCSI version 2, which theoretically should be faster than Blue SCSI version 1, but when we see the disk scores, you're going to see some surprises there. Mac SD is, of course, a very speedy drive. In theory, it's not as fast as the Blue SCSI VS version 2, but we're going to see some differences in a few moments. Now, I want to comment here on Maxima, because you'll see here it takes a speed hit in terms of the processor, not the FPU, but only the processor. Because there's some overhead there, we're booted off the Maxima disk and all the files are being run. When I ran this, I had MacBench 3 on the RAM disk too. So Maxima is using the MMU, Memory Management Unit, and that's the reason that it takes a little bit extra processor to get it going. But if we take a look at the disk mix down here, where the Blue SCSI version 1 stock SE30 without Synchr030 is pegged at 100%, we've got no ECS, right? You've got a little bit of a speed hit there, but you're still 12% higher. And then when we add ECS, you're 20% higher. But for whatever reason, Blue SCSI version 2 is slower than even the stock without Synchr030. Go figure. Mac SD is 135%, right? So you get a good speed boost there. But take a look at Maxima. All right, so it's not quite double because, again, there's a little bit of overhead there, and that's why it's not exactly 2 by, but technically you've got 2 cycle reads and 2 cycle writes. Now, if we go down here to the publishing mix, we can see that, again, we've got our base model 100%. And this time Blue SCSI version 2 comes out faster than Blue SCSI version 1, thankfully, but Mac SD, take a look at this. Boy, it's really up there. But take a look at Maxima 24. I think I'm going to have to change the scale here. There we go. So, yeah, 4.54 times faster than the stock. And it's really maxing out its bandwidth here, which, again, it's faster than any SCSI disk. And then we see the graphics scores down here for the Maxima. Isn't as high as the others because, again, you've got a little bit of overhead there. So it's important to keep that in mind. The purpose of running a RAM disk is to have a fast disk, but the acceleration that you're going to receive in some of these scores as a result of using the RAM disk is less than if you didn't use a RAM disk at all. And here we are in speedometer 4, and we can see here on the right that we've got Synchr030 with Maxima, and over here we've got Synchr030 with Blue SCSI version 2, and yeah, it's a whopping 8.6 times faster. But as you can see, the CPU does take a little bit of a hit, graphics takes a little bit of a hit, and so does math, just due to the overhead of Maxima. And then if we look down here, this is Norton System Info. Basically same sort of thing here. We see that Maxima is more than twice as fast as my Color Classic Mystic overclocked to 51.6 megahertz. And this has a super fast hard drive in it that's faster than Mac SD, Blue SCSI version 2, and others. And yet we can see that Maxima, even with the 16 megahertz, remember folks, this is 16 megahertz, not accelerated SE30, it only has the Synchr030 and then a Maxima drive on it. These are the disk scores, as you can see here. And it's getting more than double of this super fast hard drive on this highly overclocked machine. So you're going to get a lot of speed out of Maxima, no doubt. Here's what happens when I shut down, because we've got files in Maxima, right? And we loaded some of them, and preferences were updated inside the system folder sitting in RAM. So we're going to see how it's going to respond. And you can see here, saving Maxima RAM disk. It's not going to save every file, because anything that's already copied to the hard disk is going to stay on the hard disk. It's only going to copy 10 files, as you can see here, that were changed during, or actually 17, it updated it. These files were altered in some way, and it's backing those up to your hard disk. Now, just to let you know, the disadvantages of Maxima. The loading time is long. Even if you've got a SCSI to SD, loading it from that into high-speed RAM, it still takes a while. If you're a patient person, that won't matter, but I just want to mention that again. The second point is that it's very sensitive to any kind of corruption on your drive. Even a little tiny bit of corruption that otherwise would not prevent you from restarting, it will prevent Maxima from working. Either it'll error out whenever you shut down and tries to do the backup, or it won't load the RAM disk at the beginning, and then you'll have to run Norton Disk Doctor. And it's not a constant thing, but I had that problem at the very beginning, and I wasn't even able to use Maxima because of it. So if you're going to use Maxima, you need to run Norton Disk Doctor 3.5.3 to run all the checks on your drive, make sure everything's fixed, and then load it, and it should be good to go, unless your computer freezes. And usually if your computer freezes and then you have to power off and power on, sometimes that creates a little bit of corruption. Not enough to erase files or anything like that, but enough to piss off Maxima for some reason. It's very sensitive software. The other point is that you have to hold down Tab key every single time you turn on the computer, unless you just walk away for a long time. If you don't hold down Tab key, it'll boot, but it's going to load everything into the RAM disk, and then it has to restart, right? If you're booting into System 7, because Synchr030 restarts, that it has to do that to enable all 262 megabytes of RAM. And so it's loading everything from the disk into RAM 2 times, right? So if you walk away from your computer, you don't have to hold down Tab, but if you want to get down to business as soon as possible, you have to hold Tab until it does the restart, then you can let go. So that's kind of a unfortunate thing. But the biggest problem of all, and is what prevents me from using Maxima, is System Picker, this program right here. It's really a tragedy. It's unfortunate, but I guess back in the day nobody used System Picker. I don't know when it originally came out. But the way I have my drive set up is I usually have multiple volume images that are 2 gigabytes in size so that System 6 can see them. Anything bigger than 2 gigabytes, System 6 won't be able to see it. And so usually I'll have at least one drive image where I'm going to have System 7.1, 7.555, System 6, OS 8.1, 7.6.1, multiple system folders that are bootable, and then you use System Picker to choose which you want to boot from. But the problem is Maxima is not compatible with that. And so if I choose System Picker to boot from one of these system folders, it'll do it. But then there's no way for you to get it to boot to Maxima again. It won't do it. I've tried it, and I can't figure it out. Now, maybe some of you are smarter than me and can figure it out, but I couldn't figure out how to do it. And so, to me, that's a deal breaker, because I use System Picker. Now, maybe it's not a deal breaker for you, but I just want to mention it because it's a big deal breaker for me. I cannot use Maxima. And you know what? Turning it off and on again doesn't fix it. I have to completely uninstall the software, then reinstall it, just like I showed you before. And that would have to be done every time I use System Picker. Am I going to do that? No, I'm not going to do that. But if you're the type of person that has only one system folder on each of your individual mounted drives, then you don't need to use System Picker, because you're not going to select between multiple system folders on the same drive. You would use the Apple's method of startup disk. And in that case, then it's the traditional way that Macs used to work back in the day, and everything should be okay. But if you use System Picker like me, there's that incompatibility there. Again, if any of you find a workaround for it, please let me know, because that would be glorious, and then I could actually use it. But for me, that's really the biggest thumbs down in terms of using Maxima. Now, in terms of what cards are and are not compatible with Synchr030S, I'm just going to start with the ones that I use. This is the highly coveted Micron Exceed Macro Color video card, and it has the grayscale adapter, but sadly it's not compatible because the card is too tall. Even if you were to remove this side panel on the power supply, it simply would not fit. Next, we have the Daystar Turbo 40. Now, this cannot be plugged directly into this connector because this is a PDS pass-through, and this is a cache card. If you connect it directly, it will short out. So what we have to do, just as if you had no Synchr030, you would plug the adapter in first. And this is an art mix from Japan. Manabu Sakai made this adapter. There's another adapter from Bolle in Germany. Very same concept. We've got the PDS on the bottom, PDS on the top, and then a cache card for your accelerators on the side. The thing is, if you were to put your card in here, you're going to have to take off the side panel to make it fit. But the problem is that even though this technically would fit, albeit a very precarious way, a kind of upside down U, the Turbo 40 is not compatible because it's incompatible with the custom ROM SIM, and you need the custom ROM SIM to kill the memory checks at startup. There's some special software that I've tried in the past which seeks to make the Daystar compatible with custom ROM SIMs, but it creates problems with your floppy drive. So basically, the Turbo 40 is not compatible. The next card is an extremely rare and highly coveted Daystar power cache that goes into the CPU socket on your motherboard. Assuming you have a motherboard that has a socketed 68030, you would pull off your CPU and plug this board right in. It's 50 megahertz 68030 CPU, and it also has an FPU as well, and it has a cache. And to enable the cache, which gives you a lot of speed, you would have to load its Power Central extension. And unfortunately, that Power Central control panel actually is not compatible with Synchr030's extension. So you have to choose one or the other and not both. And if you choose to not use the Synchr030 extension, then you'll get maximum speed from your accelerator, which is great, but you will be limited to 128 megabytes of RAM, and that RAM is not accelerated anymore. It will be 4-cycle reads and 4-cycle writes. But if you do the opposite, you load the Synchr030 extension and do not load the Power Central control panel, then your caches on this board will be eliminated, basically turned off. And even though it's still clocked at 50 megahertz, it's a pretty big slowdown when you turn off the caches. And yes, you will get 256 megabytes of RAM, and you will get acceleration. Your little ECS board will have to be disconnected, which means you're going to have 3-cycle reads instead of 2-cycle. But that's only a minor hit. And, well, the main disadvantage, though, of loading the extension for this Synchr030 is that your caches will be off, and it's kind of a waste of the speed of this board. So I really can't recommend that. And in terms of the jumper setting, that's for compatibility with accelerator cards, it's set on SDRAM, SDRAM by default, and you do not touch that. You would leave it set to that for this particular card. And Bolle from Germany also makes a clone of this, so if you happen to have one of those, then it would, or in theory it should, work just like this card as I've described. Next, we have one of my favorite accelerators, the Demo 68030 50 megahertz. It's quite similar to the power cache that we just saw in that it has a 50 megahertz 68030, and we also have an FPU as well. The reason why I like this even more is because it's a little bit faster than the power cache due to having a larger cache. The disadvantage, of course, is that this is a PDS card, and it has a pass-through connector on the top, but the unfortunate part about combining this card with Synchr030 is that the Synchr030 extension cannot be used with the Demo because it will result in death chimes whenever you restart the computer if 32-bit addressing is turned on, and I tested and verified that. And so if you don't load the extension, you're limited to 128 megabytes of RAM, slower 4-cycle reads, 4-cycle writes, same as stock DRAM SIMs. And also in terms of installation, this card, and I tested this, it cannot be in the bottom slot. You cannot put the Synchr030 card in the top. You'll get horizontal lines and your computer won't start if you do that. So you're going to have to put your Demo, if you want to install it, into the top slot here. And I verified it will work if you do that. It's just a little bit precarious. You have to stick the card out to the side there. And also, to make this card work, you must change the jumper on Synchr030 to be the DSAC, D-S-A-C-K, DSAC setting. But the good news is that you can load the demo control panel, which will enable the caches and give you the full speed of the card. And then there are the accelerators that I do not own and could not test myself, but which YMK Devices mentions as specifically being compatible. One is the P33 power cache, which is different than my power cache. It's similar to my Daystar Turbo 40. It's a cache card that requires a separate adapter, and you can install it, just like I described before, in that upside down U-shaped condition. You're going to have to remove the left side panel of your power supply in order to kind of stick it in there and make it fit. The Synchr030's extension, as I said before, is not compatible with the Power Central control panel, so it's an either-or situation. If you disable the Synchr030's extension, then you can use Power Central, which will boost your performance, but you're going to limit yourself to 128 megabytes of RAM and slower 4-cycle reads and writes, same as your DRAM SIMs would be. And then if you enable the Synchr030 extension, then you would not be able to use Power Central. It will disable the cache of your accelerator card, and that will result in a slowdown. The jumper on Synchr030 in the case of the P33 power cache must be set to the default SDRAM location. Accelerator compatibility is still a work in progress, and YMK has spent some time on a PDS to cache adapter that one day may allow the L2 cache on the P33 power cache to be enabled, and also enable the Synchr030's memory acceleration too. And last but not least, the accelerator that's strongly recommended by YMK Devices, which I also do not have, is the Booster 2.0, which is a PDS card made by Zigzag Joe over on the 68K MLA forums. The booster has no on-card cache at all, and as a result, no extension, and therefore no incompatibilities with Synchr030's extension. Performance is slightly faster than the P33 power cache when its Power Central control panel is not loaded, which means the P33's L2 cache is disabled. Note that if you install the booster in Synchr030's top PDS slot, you'll also need to add a 180 ohm resistor, that's a pull-up resistor, between the CPU clock and 5-volt pins as shown in this photo. You don't need the resistor when installing the booster as the bottom card, but that would make Synchr030's top PDS connector come dangerously close to the high-voltage CRT suction cup. Also note that Synchr030's jumper must be set to DSAC when using the booster. So what's the price tag on all that high-speed memory goodness, you ask? Synchr030 is sold on eBay and Tendy, with Tendy being the cheaper of the two at $269 US, with free shipping in the USA. Shipping to other countries is very economical right now, but inflation may ultimately drive that cost higher. Synchr030 is great if you happen to have bad RAM sockets, so it might be good to compare the cost of Synchr030 with a professional socket replacement service and 8 sticks of RAM. 30-pin DRAM SIMs are sold by several different vendors, but if you want to go with premium, Silicon Insider offers their gold-plated 16 megabyte SIMs for a very reasonable $98 for 8 sticks, and that's with free shipping to the USA. But all that glitters is not gold, and you may want to instead have some useful diagnostic LEDs on the SIMs for reads and writes. KMac Vintage offers 8 16 megabyte SIMs based on Oxcat's open source design for $129, which includes international shipping. You'll then need to consider the astronomical cost of SIM sockets these days. Phoenix Enterprises is one of the few vendors still selling them, and as of March 2025, they charge $9.60 each. That's $77 for 8 sockets, and doesn't even include the tax or shipping. But even if you had the sockets, you'd still need the help of a pro to install them because it's hard to do without the right tools or experience. Will Jacobs of KMac Vintage has offered a 2CI reloaded service and an SE30 and Mac Classic reloaded service for a while now, and I actually shipped one of my SE30 boards to Will last month so I could see firsthand how great his workmanship is. I'll be sure to let you know how that turns out. But for now, I asked Will for his repair rates, and he said he normally charges $75 an hour, but a SIM socket swap requires testing too, bringing the total labor charge to $100. Will also said that sourcing the sockets is becoming harder, and the price he offers these days is $9 each, but doesn't know how long that supply will last. In total, KMac will do the complete SE30 SIM socket swap, testing, and ship the box back to a US address, all for $184. Of course, you'd need to ship your board to KMac to start the process. If you're located in California, for example, USPS offers a medium flat rate box for about $19. So that means if you live in the US and choose KMac to do the socket swap, and I'm not saying you have to use KMac, it's just the company I chose to do this hypothetical example, then your total cost would come to about $203, assuming $19 from shipping to California to Florida and so on. But then when you add the RAM cost to that, it puts you over the $300 mark, and that's more expensive than Synchr030. However, Will has long been worried about the end of SIM socket sales, so he's prepared SIP-RAM as an alternative.
The SIM sockets are not made anymore. I had to create something new, and the intention was to make SIP. You get the SIP like actually this and the header. They just go right in back here. And it really becomes a very nice tight fit. So if I go and put this one in here, there you go. Very easy replacement for the hard to get and very expensive SIM sockets.
Will told me that the total cost for a socket swap and SIP-RAM and shipping back to the USA would be $200 for 32 megabytes total RAM, plus $19 or whatever the shipping cost would be to Will's address in Florida, so for example, $219 total, or $232 for 128 megabytes of total RAM, plus $19 in this example for shipping to Will, so that means $251 total. And those prices are cheaper than Synchr030, but you won't have memory acceleration, and if you have a damaged PCB trace or two under your memory sockets, well, Synchr030 is still a great solution for that problem. It won't solve every problem on your SC30 motherboard, but anything memory related, well, Synchr030 can come in handy. And don't forget that you're also going to need to have a custom ROM SIM in order to kill the painfully slow RAM checking at cold boot. This happens to be one from Kay Koba of Carol's Mac Mods, but I put a link to all of the ROM SIM vendors for you down in the text description below, so be sure to check that out. Now, I realize that the $269 price tag of Synchr030 is not going to appeal to everyone, especially if you're not deeply invested or heavily into this hobby, but if you're one to leap at the opportunity to put the latest and greatest tech into your vintage machine, then $269 is a very reasonable price, especially in light of its engineering design, an 8-layer board with all of these great features and acceleration too. A lot really went into creating this. Even before I received my beta board in April of last year, 2024, I was told that there were 5 previous revisions that were done internal to YMK, and then after my beta testing there was yet another board revision done, which is the current selling product. And each board revision takes time. You have to hand solder a lot of components, and well, my thinking is that you're paying for the product, yes, but you're also paying to motivate YMK to continue innovating and come out with some similarly great stuff for us in the future. I also want to say that whenever we see some great new modern creation sold in this hobby, it usually comes to life by one guy. And maybe that person collaborates with 1 or 2 other geniuses in our community. And yes, they ultimately do sell the product for money in order to recoup their costs and maybe to turn a little bit of a profit. But it usually is not the case where they're milking the Macintosh for all it's worth and then getting busy on the next great thing. More often than not, it's a labor of love. Ultimately, it's up to you, the buyer, to decide whether Synchr030S or the fabulous MacEffects Clear Case, or at least half of it that you see here, or the ROM SIM from Carol's Mac Mods, or the RAM from Silicon Insider or KMac Vintage, or anything else that you see sold in this hobby, is worth the asking price. Now it's your turn to let me know your thoughts. Will you be buying a Synchr030S? If not, have you ever spent the big bucks on any significant upgrade for your vintage computers? Let me know down in the comments below. I'm a big upgrade guy myself, and I'm curious to know how many of you are too. Thank you for watching today, folks, and I wish all of you a fantastic month of Macintosh.